Greetings, readers. I'm Sarah Reed, the Reader's Advisory Librarian at the Oshkosh Public Library, and this is Book Buzz, the December 2024 edition. I'm going to do something a little bit different this time. Not a lot of books, new books released usually right in December. The big holiday rush is usually released in November, and then things go a little bit quiet in December. So what I'm going to do instead is talk about my favorite reads that I read over the past year. Now, not all of these books were published within the past year. Some of them are older titles that I just picked up this year. If you would like recommendations of some more recent staff favorites from the Oshkosh Public Library, you'll want to check out our Great Reads video, which should be out very soon. And I have a couple suggestions in there also, and maybe a few duplicates. So this is my reading journal. It's where I track everything I read throughout the year and whether or not I liked it, because I don't always remember everything I read. I always try and have 3 books going at a time, at least. 1 audiobook, 1 ebook, and 1 paper book. So I read a lot. But if you're watching this, you probably do too. So I'm going to talk about my favorite things that I read in 2024. First up, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by B.E. Schwab. I read this for our band book club, and I absolutely loved it. The premise is that the woman, Addie LaRue, makes a deal with a supernatural being to help her avoid an unwanted marriage, but as a consequence, she ends up living forever, but no one can ever remember her or recognize her. So she moves throughout history as this mysterious, forgettable figure who can't seem to make her mark on humanity. But it's incredibly good if you like historical fiction, if you like fantasy. It's not super heavy on the magic. There's even a romantic storyline to it, because how do you find love if no one ever remembers you? It's a really good book. I cried a lot, but in a good way. You know what I mean. So, highly recommend that one. I gave it 5 stars in my reading journal. John Green's The Anthropocene Reviewed was a nonfiction book that I read this year that I loved a lot. It's a series of short essays that are John Green's reviews of things that occur in humanity. And some of them are really heartfelt and touching. Some of them are interesting and you learn cool sciencey facts or history facts. And some of them are just plain funny. If you're looking for something that's... I listened to it on audio, and it kind of reminded me of listening to a lighthearted podcast, although some of them are not lighthearted. Some of them are touching. But highly recommend if you're looking for an easy-to-listen-to nonfiction book. I thought it was great. Another one I loved this year was Kristen Perrin's How to Solve Your Own Murder. For my review of that, watch our Great Reads video. This is a cozy mystery comedy. It's set in 2 timelines. I think I did talk about it on a previous Book Buzz. I ended up really enjoying it. And if you like mysteries, especially cozy mysteries set in the English countryside but with a more modern twist, I think you'll really like this one. A scary book that I read this year and loved was Tananarive Dew's The Good House, which I think might be one of the most perfect haunted house books that I have ever read. It's a great blend of horror and family saga and history. And, well, Tananarive Dew is one of the best living writers that we have today. So I can't recommend any of her work enough. All of it. Read it all. That one is a good one. Another one that I read this year and really loved was Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead. This one won some major awards. Lots of folks are out there reading it. I listened to the audiobook on CD here from the library, and the narrator did an incredible job of bringing this epic story to life. This is a retelling of Dickens' David Copperfield, but in a contemporary Appalachian setting. And it's just masterful, the way the story comes together, and you fall in love with these characters. They feel very real. Barbara Kingsolver's character work is exquisite. Highly recommend. one that I reread this year because it's nice and short, so I reread it from time to time because I love it, is Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. This is a kind of philosophical fantasy book about a man who's lost, well, maybe not lost, he just exists in a labyrinth of rooms. It's very good. I can't give away too much. Just take a look at it. If you like any kind of metafiction or fantasy, I think you would like it a lot. One of my favorite books that I read this year, and it became one of my favorite books of all time, is R.F. Kuang's Babel. This is a pretty well-known fantasy novel. It's a big, long book, but it takes place in Oxford at a school where students are engraving translations of languages into silver, and the difference between the meaning in the two translations of the word creates a kind of magical effect. It's a little complicated to describe, but it's really good. It's a slow start, I will say. I did try to read this once a few years ago and didn't quite get into it, but I gave it another try this year and absolutely loved it. It's one of those where the world building really amounts to a lot in the end. There's a big payoff. It gets exciting eventually. I would describe it kind of how, some books you read and it's exciting right away or all the way through. Like if you build a tower out of Lincoln logs and knock it down right away, it's fun, it's exciting. But this is more like building the Eiffel Tower out of toothpicks before you knock it down. There's a lot more build up, but then the fall is a lot more meaningful and dramatic. So the world building and the time it takes to set this story up absolutely pays off, and I highly recommend it. I also read, kind of in that dark academia vein as Babel, I wanted another book just like it when it was done. It was one of those where I finished it and I was like, oh, I just want to read this again. I don't want anything else. So I read Donna Tartt's The Secret History, which is a pretty well-known dark academia novel. And I really liked it too. Not as much as Babel, but it was, it played some mind games with you. There were some unreliable twists and turns and characters and lies and motives. There were good mystery elements to it and really good character work in that one as well. So highly recommend that one. Gabino Iglesias' House of Bone and Rain. If you're in the mood for something very dark and violent, I would recommend this one. The premise of this one takes place in Puerto Rico, where a group of young men, one of them, their mother, is murdered, and they are determined to get revenge. Meanwhile, a hurricane is coming towards them, and this storm almost has a supernatural feel to it. If you've ever been in a very bad storm, it feels alive, you know what I mean? And that you get that feeling, that sense of dread just by reading this book. So if you love horror or noir, definitely check that one out. Let's see, some of my other favorites. The Bullet Swallower by Elizabeth Gonzalez James. I talk about this one in Great Reads too. This was the most entertaining book that I read this year. It's a blend of a Western adventure novel with a little twist of magical realism. There's some family saga in there. In this book, you have a young man who he's in the 60s and he's uncovering his family's history. He finds a book that says it tells his whole family's history, and he discovers his ancestors did some absolutely horrific things, and it almost seems to have resulted in a curse upon the family. And at the same time, it talks about the mystery of his grandfather, who was a bandit known as the Bullet Swallower. And then in another timeline in the book, you're actually with the bandit, Antonio, the Bullet Swallower, following him through his life as he seeks revenge against the Texas Rangers for them killing his younger brother. And it's very exciting. It's like watching an exciting Western movie. It's a very cinematic book. I described it as a cross between Indiana Jones and Lonesome Dove with a little twist of dark magic in it. It's extremely good. Another scary book I loved was Mary by Nat Cassidy. In this one, a woman returns to her old hometown where her family history was not very positive, and as she goes through the town, she kind of reawakens these old feuds. But there's also something strange and haunting going on, where every time she looks at someone's face, a woman's face, it starts to deteriorate, and so does her own. And it turns out she's being haunted by the history's past serial killer, and is perhaps being possessed by the spirit of this serial killer. It's very dark and scary, but there's also a lot of humor mixed into this book. It's pretty good. If you like horror, you will love this book. I read a lot of epic fantasy this year too. I decided it was remiss that I had never read any Brandon Sanderson. So I read the first 3 books of the Mistborn series, the original trilogy, and I liked them quite a lot. I really enjoyed the first one. I thought the second one was just okay. And I thought the third one was pretty good. But overall, as an experience, it was good, and I definitely don't regret reading those 3, even though they're very long books. They're chonky. I don't know if I'll continue to read there's the original trilogy, and then the series continues for a lot of books. I don't know if I'll read them or not, but I probably will. Let's see, another one. Oh, one of my 5-star reads this year, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. My boss here at the library, Joe, recommended this one to me, and he described it as the most happy and optimistic post-apocalyptic novel he'd read, and that sounded really intriguing to me, so of course I had to read it. And he's right. It takes place kind of post-apocalypse after a terrible virus wipes out most of the human race, and we follow several characters as they are walking through this abandoned landscape of the Midwest, meeting up with other bands of survivors, how the world works in this after time. And it's sad, yes, there's a lot of sad points, but at the same time, the overall feeling throughout the book is there's very much a sense of this isn't the end. Like, life goes on, it continues, humanity's still humanity. So it was strangely optimistic. Then I read 2 absolutely terrifying haunted house books that I liked a lot. One, The September House by Carissa Orlando. In this one, there is a woman and her husband have purchased a new house, and it is very haunted, but really only in the month of September. And you find out why. I won't tell you, though. But this was just a brilliantly done narrative where there's some humor in this one too, because this woman, she's in this house and she has learned to live with this horrific haunting, and she just gets through it. And, she loves this house, so she just buckles down. She's learned to live with the ghosts. She's even befriended some of them, the ones she can. But her husband couldn't take it, and he has not only left, but disappeared. And their daughter, who can't contact him or find him, when she realizes that no one has heard from him for months, she says, "I'm coming home to figure out what happened to him." And her mom's like, "Oh, no, don't come here," because it's almost September. But she does. And now this woman has to try and hide the haunting from her daughter, which gets comical at times, as she tries to kind of conceal the bleeding walls and things like that, scrubbing those with a bucket every morning. And I won't tell you any more than that because it would reveal too much, but it is really good, and not even just in the haunting aspect of it, which was also well done, but the interaction between the characters and the slow reveal throughout the story. And I love a good unreliable narrator, and this is one of the best examples I've read in a long time. Highly recommend that. The other scary book I read right after that, because I wanted more of the same, was My Darling Girl by Jennifer McMahon, and this is one of those books that it seems like it was written just to gnaw at my own personal fears. I was like, is Jennifer McMahon living inside my head and knowing exactly what I'm scared of? Because that's what it felt like when I was reading this book. In this one, a woman and her husband and their 2 daughters are just getting on with life as hard as it is when her estranged mother contacts her and lets her know that she is dying and wants to die, to come home to die and have her daughter be the one to take care of her as she passes away, which is a little difficult because they did not get along. But she craves that chance to reconnect with her mother, so she says yes. And as she's caring for her mother at home, the mother seems to be a completely different person. She gets along excellently with everyone, all the woman's friends, her daughters, her husband, they're all completely charmed by her mother. But when she's alone with her, it's a very different story. And she begins to suspect that her mother is actually possessed. And she acts as if she is possessed by some sort of evil spirit. But as she becomes more and more convinced that her mother is possessed, her family begins to think more and more that she's actually crazy because they all think the mom is great. So there's this really fascinating interplay of characters, and it's very well done and very unsettling. I listened to this on audio on my commute, and I had to remind myself to breathe sometimes. So that was good. That's a good sign. And another one I read recently that I really liked was Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. I also talked about this one in a previous Book Buzz. The premise of this one is that there is a cult classic horror movie that never actually got fully made. But little pieces of it and the script had been released to like private groups online and horror fans, and so it has this cult following. And then a director comes along and decides that they are going to remake it. But it was one of those cursed films where it seems like great misfortune befell everyone who was involved with the project, and now the only surviving cast member is the one who played the Thin Kid, and they would like him to reprise his role in this remake. And so this book goes through 2 timelines where it goes through the past of how the original movie was worked on, and then in the present day, the work on the remake and how that's going. And it's told from the point of view of the Thin Kid, and it's another case of just exquisitely done, unreliable narrator, because we only have his point of view throughout. And as you read, you start to suspect that there's more to the story than we're being told, but the clues are very expertly laid out for us throughout. So I really recommend that one too. And I think that's the end of the ones. I'm reading a couple right now that I think I would also recommend that I will probably finish before the end of December. But I'd hate to recommend them prematurely in case the ending's terrible or something like that. But those were some of my favorite reads from this year that I enjoyed. I would love to hear what yours are. If you want to drop them in the comments below or come by the library, I'm often at the reference desk on the 2nd floor. I want to hear all about the books that you loved. Make some recommendations for me so that maybe I could talk about them in my next reading wrap-up here for Book Buzz. And otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful end of your year, a happy new year, and I will be back in January with some fresh 2025 new releases and recommendations. Take care. Bye.